and that's Ray Didinger, who joins us right now. Ray, how are you?
Fine, Zach. How are you?
I'm doing great. So why write this play, Tommy and me?
Well, it's a story that I've been carrying around with me now for literally since boyhood, and I've always thought it was a story that I wanted to tell about my relationship with Tommy McDonald, the Eagles Hall of Famer, which goes back to the 50s when he was drafted by the Eagles, and I was just a little kid going up to their training camp with my parents, and chasing after him, trying to get his autograph, letting him, having him let me carry his helmet, that kind of stuff, and then developing a friendship over time when I became a sports writer, and then once I became a Hall of Fame voter, kind of leading the effort to get him in the Hall of Fame, and then in 1998 when he actually did get in the Hall of Fame, then having him give me the very great honor of being his presenter in Canton. So to go from a 10-year-old kid carrying his helmet at Hershey to being the guy standing next to him on the steps of the Hall of Fame in 1998 is, I always thought it was a pretty extraordinary story, and I always looked for what I thought might be the best way of telling it. And a couple of years ago, I just thought, well, I didn't quite feel like a book, and it didn't quite feel like a newspaper article. It felt like something sort of in between, and I thought, well, let me just see if I can turn it into a play, and here we are.
You're clearly more accomplished than me, but I will say that a few weeks ago I got the chance to attend the Mike Piazza Jersey retirement press conference, and I grew up as a kid in Long Island, and I idolized Mike Piazza. I was him for Halloween for 4 straight years when I was in elementary school and then also middle school. So just the first time you met Tommy, it must have been so surreal for you because you grew up loving this guy, and now you clearly become a close confidant of his.
Yeah, it's been a kind of a remarkable story. Literally going from being the little kid in training camp back in 1957 to later on, our time didn't really overlap in terms of me being a professional newspaper guy. I mean, he retired after the '68 season, and I didn't start covering the NFL for the Philadelphia Bullet until 1970. So I never actually covered him as a player, but I certainly had occasion to interview him a lot because when you're covering pro football and you're covering the Eagles, I mean, there's always stories that you have to write about the anniversary of this game or the anniversary of this record or looking back on this rivalry or looking back on this game. So I always had occasion over the years to seek Tommy out and interview him about various highlights in his career or parts of the 1960 season, that kind of stuff. But I never told him about our history in Hershey. I never told him that I was the little kid who carried his helmet. I never told him that until we were actually in Canton right before we walked on the stage at the Hall of Fame.
And Tommy played clearly before my time from 1957 to 1968. Can you just describe to my audience what type of player he was? We know he was a very good one.
He was very good. He was very good as for sure. I mean, when he retired after the 1968 season, he ranked 6th all time in receptions. He ranked 4th all time in receiving yardage, and he ranked 2nd all time in receiving touchdowns. I mean, there's only one player in the whole history of pro football that had more touchdown catches than him, and that was Don Hudson, who played for the Packers back in the 30s and 40s. So, I mean, Tommy's career was a remarkable one. And, I mean, it's just amazing to me, and I still don't really understand why it took 30 years to get him in the Hall of Fame. But once I became a voter and once I got involved in the voting process, I wasn't going to stop until I finally got him over the threshold, and it happened. But he's 5'9.5". He was 172 pounds. He was a little guy, even in that era, but very, very fast, and I will say this to this day, he had the best hands I've ever seen. I mean, I know people in the modern era will talk about Chris Carter and Jerry Rice and some of the other great receivers, large, and I mean some guys that were noted for having great hands. But I've never seen a receiver that had better hands than Tommy McDonald. I mean, I watched every game the guy played, and I'm not saying this is no exaggeration. I never saw him drop a pass, never, not one.
And I was able to watch his Hall of Fame speech today on YouTube, and that was a mouthful. He's clearly a loquacious man, and you introduced him. So what was your favorite part about that Hall of Fame speech? Because it was legendary, Ray.
My favorite part was when it was over. Because I spent the better part of 7 months trying to talk him out of it. I was trying to convince him as hard as I could that he should just do a speech like everybody else does. And I told him that I would write him one. He said, I've never written a speech. I wouldn't know how. And I said, well, I'll write you one. That's not a problem. So I did write him one, and I took it with me to Canton, and I tried all that morning. Kept shoving it in his hands and saying, Tommy, please read the speech. Just read the speech. Just read the speech. Don't do the boom box. Don't do the chest bumps. Don't do all that stuff. But he was determined to do it his way, and he did. And looking back, I mean, as much as I was cringing while it was going on, the thing is, the people in the audience loved it. I mean, they got it. They understood what he was doing, and they just had a ball with it. And I remember Sports Illustrated writing about it the next week, said, thank you, Tommy McDonald, for reminding us all that sports is meant to be fun. I think people took it in that spirit, and so everybody had a good time with it. But I have to say that it was a very, very uneasy 6 or 7 months leading up to it, because I just thought that this is not what you do at the Hall of Fame.
How nervous were you when the play first debuted? How nervous were you when you were watching it?
Oh, incredibly nervous, because I had no idea how it was going to be received. I mean, it's the first time I'd ever written a play. It was the first time I had ever really done anything that was theatrical. I mean, I've written books, I've written for newspapers, I've done TV, radio, all that kind of stuff. Worked at NFL Films for 12 years doing documentaries. I had done all that, but I had never written a play. And, there's something very raw and very in the moment about theater. I mean, it just happens in real time. And, as the playwright, you're just standing in the back, and you have no control over anything. I mean, you have no control over the actors. You have no control over the lighting. You have no control over the audience reaction, obviously. So you just stand in the back completely powerless, just watching this thing play out. And I've never been in that position before, and it was really scary. But it's been, I have to tell you, Zach, it has been so well received. Everybody has really liked it.
That's great.
We had 12 performances. They've all sold out.
Awesome.
We got one more weekend of plays this weekend. It closes on Sunday, and it's been great. Standing ovations every night. And Tommy and his family came on last Saturday to the matinee, and they had a ball.
That's unbelievable. As Ray Didinger joins us, legend at 94 WIP and Comcast Sportsnet, now has a playwright. He's a playwright for Tommy and me. Let's get to the birds. Where were you yesterday when you found out the news about Lane Johnson? I know you don't have a cell phone, so I always wonder how you find out that news, and what is your reaction to it?
I was out, and somebody said to me, how about Lane Johnson? And I said, what are you talking about? And then they told me. And so, yeah, not exactly good news. I mean, if the Eagles, I think the Eagles are going to have some problems this year anyway. But if they lose Lane Johnson for 10 games, then those problems are compounded immediately, because they can't very well survive without him. I mean, they need him on the field, and they need him playing well. They thought that they had begun to repair the offensive line, which was a real problem last year. They got Jason Peters back, and he seems to feel like he's healthy and ready to go. The signing of Brandon Brooks, they thought was going to help him at guard, probably will. Signing Wisniewski probably is going to help him at the other guard spot. But the star on that line and the best player on that line is Lane Johnson. And if they were to lose him, then I think that's a huge blow for that offense.
And I also think it kills what they're trying to do at quarterback, because in the ideal world, it would be to play Bradford and then be able to flip him at the end of the year. And we know Bradford is very fragile, and if you don't have Lane Johnson, that's a major concern. And then eventually when you see Carson Wentz, you don't want to throw him out there with that current offensive line if Johnson's not in the plans.
Yeah, I mean, it hurts you. It hurts you in the immediate. It just hurts you on the line of scrimmage every time you snap the ball. But it definitely has a ripple effect through the whole offense for all the reasons that you cited. I mean, Sam Bradford's a guy that gets hurt all the time, so protecting him is priority number one. And at some point this season, I really do think they're going to want to turn this thing over to Carson Wentz and let him start to play and kind of make this team his own. But you don't want to put a rookie quarterback out there behind an offensive line that's in disrepair. So, I mean, I don't know how good this team's going to be this year anyway, but to lose Lane Johnson is a huge setback, and there's no question about that. I don't know where this thing's going to end up, but if they actually do wind up losing him for 10 games, then that's a tremendous blow for Doug Pederson, who's just now starting out his first career as a head coach.
I know guys, they take a lot of supplements in the National Football League. That's no secret, but Johnson already failed one test. He knows that he's on the hook for the $35.5 million if he fails another test. Does he need this peptide? Like, is it a necessity for him to play?
Well, I don't. I mean, I don't know. I don't have access to his medicine cabinet, but I do think that my feeling about Lane Johnson and all the players in the league is, this idea. Well, I didn't know. I mean, I didn't know that was that compound was in there. I didn't know that was in there. I didn't know that was off limits. Well, if you're putting anything in your body, you better know what it is. I mean, that's just common sense, and that applies to just the average person, not just football players. If you're ingesting something, you better know what it is before you ingest it. I mean, that's just common sense. And the stakes are raised, and you're talking about football players and millions of dollars that they know they're going to be tested, and they're going to be held accountable for everything they take. And the idea that, well, geez, I didn't know that was in there, or I didn't know that was unallowed. That's unacceptable. You have to know that. You have to know that. So. Lane is a guy that I think has probably had to work really hard to keep his weight up anyway. I mean, he was a 210, 215-pound guy when he enrolled at the University of Oklahoma. He was a tight end, and by the time he finished up, he was a 300-pound offensive lineman. So, you have to think that he was working really hard to get his weight up, and when you get to the NFL, you're going to have to keep working really hard to keep your weight up if you're Lane Johnson. I mean, Jason Peters is just a naturally massive guy. I don't think he has to do this sort of thing, but a guy like Lane Johnson does. So whether it's weight room weight or whether it's, banana pancakes weight or whether it's supplement weight, I mean, Lane Johnson's one of those guys that's really going to have to keep doing those sorts of things to keep himself on the field. And if it's a PED issue, then he's going to have to find a way to work around it because the league they're pretty strict on this kind of stuff, and the testing has gotten better.
Wrapping up with Ray Didinger, and Ray, I know you have to run in just a second. So early impressions so far with Carson Wentz and Doug Pederson and the limited stuff you've been able to see from them?
Well, I think Pederson is running his camp almost exactly like an Andy Reid camp. But that's what they wanted. I mean, I think when Jeff Lurie hired Doug Pederson, he was really looking for Andy Reid 2.0. I mean, that's exactly what he wanted. And Doug came here with an Andy Reid playbook, and that was fine because that's exactly what Jeff was looking for. So Doug's approach is much like Andy. The offense looks a lot like Andy's. The daily practice routines and the way it's structured and organized looks a lot like Andy's. The physicality of it looks a lot like Andy's. I mean, the first week in pads was about as tough and physical as the CBA allows. So in that respect, it all looks very familiar. A lot different than what Chip Kelly did the last couple of years, that's for sure. And as far as Wentz, he looks like a rookie quarterback. I mean, he has up and down. I mean, he has on days when he's good, he's real good, and then there are other times when he looks like a rookie. But I think the big thing with him is he's certainly got a tremendous amount of physical ability. He's got great size, a cannon for an arm. Can really move for a big man. I mean, you can see his mobility. He's a good ball handler. His passing mechanics are better than you would think. I mean, he's a pretty polished young player. But the thing he's going to have to adapt to, and it begins tomorrow night, is learning to play at the speed of the NFL. Because the speed of the game up here is going to be vastly different than what he saw back in the Dakotas. And that's where he has to get. I mean, he's a smart kid. He's not going to have any trouble learning what's on the blackboard or in the playbook. But what he's going to have to learn is how to play and compete at the high speed at the NFL because that's something he's never seen before.
I wasn't the biggest fan of bringing in Doug Pederson, but I will say, and I know it's tough to be very critical of him because we're only a few weeks into training camp and we haven't even played the first preseason game yet, let alone the first regular season. But I find it funny that everyone got on him after he adjusted with the tackling and changed his approach. And then also he made another adaptation when he decided to change the way that he was going to deliver the play calls. With Chip, we all complained about how he never adapt. And finally, when we get a guy that does adapt and reevaluate a situation, fans are screaming. It's like we can't have things. You got to have it one way. You can't have it both ways.
Yeah, I think that's true. Well, the thing with Doug is there's no track record here. I mean, he's not a guy he's not a guy that's come from somewhere and has a resume of success where you just say, well, this guy's, look, he won here and he won there, and obviously his methodology works. So you got to give him the benefit of the doubt. With Doug, there's none of that. I mean, Doug is a guy that was just, I mean, he was literally coaching high school football not that long ago. So, I think there's going to be a fair amount of skepticism. He's not going to have as much the benefit of the doubt. He's not going to have as much currency with the fans here. I mean, the fans are sort of sitting back and just saying, "Okay, show me that you belong in the big chair." Because his history here was, the only time these fans saw him was they saw him as a quarterback and not a very good one. So there's a lot of skepticism here. And if there's one thing about the Philadelphia fans and the mood of the city right now is there's expectations are about as low as I can remember. I mean, the fans here are interested.
They're down in the dumps this year. They really are.
Well, they are. And you saw it. I mean, when they had the open practice at the Link, I mean, in past years they had 40,000 people down there for the open practice. And this year they announced 18,000. I'm not even sure it was that. It was definitely a fall off. Now, does that mean the fans aren't interested? No. I mean, they're as interested as they've ever been. And the Eagles run this town. They own this town. There's no question about that. What's different this year is not the level of interest, but the level of expectation. I think the fans here are bracing themselves for a long, hard season.
Before we let you run, where can fans buy tickets if they want to see some of the final productions of Tommy and Me?
Well, right now, all the shows are sold out.
Oh, wow.
All the shows are sold out. It's playing at a place called the Fringe Arts Theater on Columbus Avenue, on Columbus Boulevard in Philadelphia. But if anybody wants tickets, they're putting names on a wait list, and folks are coming to the theater, and they're waiting to see if there are no shows. And most of the wait listed people are getting in. So here's what you would do. Call Theater Exile at 215-218-4022. And talk to Breanne Shaw. She's in charge of the tickets, and maybe some have come loose. They were talking about possibly adding a few extra chairs for the weekend because the demand has been so great. But that's what you would do: 215-218-4022, Theater Exile. Talk to Breanne and see what she can tell because we got one show Friday night, then we got two shows on Saturday, two shows on Sunday. So, I tell you, it's been a great run, Zach. It's been a real thrill.
Well, Ray, you're the best football analyst in this town. Now you're the best playwright, and you also, I'll still stand by it, you have the best phone connection of any guest that we ever had. Your phone is always impeccable. Ray Didinger, thanks so much.
All right, Zach. Take care now.
You
Bye-bye.
too. There's Ray Didinger. It's just such a good analyst, and he's done it all. That's a tremendous story with him and Tommy McDonald. That's such a thrill being able to grow up and watch a player and then be able to be a confidant of his, introduce him at the Hall of Fame speech, play an integral role of him getting into the Hall of Fame. It's just such a cool story. And now he's a playwright. Tommy and Me. It's just great. And that thing's selling out. There's more interest in Ray Didinger's play than there is in the Philadelphia Eagles this year. And I always stood by it, and I always will. Find any guess in the history of radio. There is no one, and I mean no one, that has a better phone connection than Ray Didinger. Because it's always on a landline.